Hello, Lemonsterites. It is your state representative, Natalie Higgins, here for the September episode of Representing Leominster. And I could not be more thrilled to be joined with a good friend, Rep. Christina Minicucci, who represents the 14th Essex District, North Andover, Haverhill, Lawrence, and Methuen, a whole lot of gateway cities, and someone who I've had the pleasure of working with for the last 4 years. And I am very upset with her that she's decided not to run for another election. And this will be my last year getting to work with her in this capacity. But I'm really excited to have her, and it really pushed me to have her on this TV show so you could all meet this amazing woman that I have gotten to work with. We co-chair the Sexual Violence Task Force through the Women's Caucus this session, and we're doing some pretty cool stuff together. But Rep. Minicucci, Christina, could you tell our viewers a little bit about why you wanted to run for state rep in the 14th Essex and your background and kind of how you came to the state legislature?
Well, thanks for having me, Natalie. I appreciate it and all your nice words. I will miss you, but don't worry, I'll still be around. We'll find new ways to work together.
I cannot wait.
So, I decided I'd been involved in campaigns really most of my life since I was a teenager, and, would always kind of work behind the scenes, holding signs, sending out mailers, going door to door, all the things that make campaigns run. And I know how important it is to be a volunteer and, what that does to help move campaigns. But I was approached we had an open seat, and I was approached by a bunch of people that said, "You've been involved in politics for I don't know, 20 years. You think you're more than 20 years. I have to age myself. Maybe you might be interested in running." And I kind of laughed it off, thinking, like, how could I possibly do this? Like, I have no experience in running. And the way that it was framed to me was, you've always been really involved in the community and a big community advocate, and this will just let you take your commitment to community and helping people to a higher level. And with a little bit of cajoling, I finally decided to run, and it was a really interesting experience. And even having been a campaign volunteer before, I recognized how important it is to have your community behind you and the volunteers, and being out there as a candidate is a different animal altogether. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of stress, but I really enjoyed it. And during my campaign, I represent, as you mentioned, 3 gateway cities. One of them is Lawrence, and the Columbia gas explosion hit in September 4 years ago. And it was
Right.
where Lionel Rondon, who was the only person who died in the explosion, actually died right in my district. And so, and most of my district in North Andover was impacted. So it really changed the face of campaigning. And, I halted my campaign. We focused a lot on giving back and just doing our best to volunteer, and help out. It really gave me the first taste of what it was going to be like to be a state rep. Sort of how do you connect people with resources? And sometimes it's local connections, and sometimes it was state connections, but it really, informed a big piece of my next 4 years, was sort of that, really, it was a very difficult time for our community, but also
Right.
really informed a lot of the policy work that I did starting off my first term, with working on gas safety and trying to help move towards greener sources of energy, and then making sure our gateway cities are not left behind. Because
Right.
as we move with climate change and trying to green the Commonwealth, our gateway cities are frequently left behind. And that was really, just very formative and informative for me in understanding, watching the differences between people in Andover and North Andover who were able to just jump to action and self-mitigate and get themselves back. And they were they were changing over to alternative energy sources, and they were
Right.
putting in mini splits in their house, for example, which used electricity instead of gas, and they were able to get back into their homes quickly. But a lot of families in Lawrence were left for 3 months without heat, and without the ability, without the electrical systems in their house to be able to even plug in a space heater. So it really showed the differences between the challenges of the gateway cities and challenges of other communities. So, but anyway, that was like, a little bit of kind of how I
Yeah.
started, and then kind of what really drove me to start some of the policy pieces that have been important to me.
Yeah. I often talk about our job as jack of all trades, master of like very few. And I think that that's an example of you and your delegation. We often work as a region together,
Yeah.
really work to teach all of us about how do we make sure that folks have access to these utilities in the safest way possible.
Yeah.
Um, and and that there could be these unintended disasters
Mhm.
that we've got to be ready for.
That's right. And it really, as we, and then from there, of course, we moved right into the COVID
Mhm.
pandemic, and, Lawrence, Methuen, and Haverhill, which are three of the communities I represented, are basically always in the top 10 worst places in the state. And, we're equity communities. And
Mhm.
so places that were disproportionately hit. And it was I feel like the gas disaster and trying
Mhm.
to figure out how to come back from
Mhm.
getting the rug pulled out from underneath you,
Yeah.
basically prepared us a little bit better for COVID, and being able to respond to people, and having a system in place, of providers, of, social service providers, of people who we were able to plug into quickly, to help people get what they
Mhm.
needed. So, but in our gateway cities, as representing Leominster, the challenges
Mhm.
are different every day. We do wear a ton of hats. So
Yeah.
trying to trying to figure out how to help people be as successful as possible, and
Mhm.
reminding people that it's not the world according to Boston, and that we exist,
Right.
and our challenges are different than Boston challenges, and wealthier communities around the state.
Mhm. And I think being a part of the Gateway Cities Caucus, having really tremendous leaders across the gateway cities like you has been a really great resource for each other to learn. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're learning from each other. We're figuring out what's working. And in COVID, we talked really daily with so many of our colleagues trying to figure
Mhm.
out how do we better support our community? How do we hold the executive administration more accountable to making sure that those resources are making it into gateway cities like Leominster and Fitchburg and Lawrence and Haverhill and Methuen, who are just really being decimated and hit in such a deeper way,
Mhm.
and are still struggling
Yep.
to recover not only from the pandemic but the current economic crisis, and
Yep.
just how to get our stories to resonate with the 159 other
That's right.
House members. And
It
so,
Yeah. And I think that in communities like ours, the state a lot of times was focusing on small business, for example. Like, I don't have small businesses. Small businesses are 150 people, right? I have
mm,
micro businesses, family
mm,
businesses, and we have hundreds of those.
right.
And, being able to elevate those stories up to to the
Mhm,
secretary of, and make sure that they were including our micro
mhm,
businesses was really important. And, some of those original grant rounds, everything was going to big businesses, and our businesses were being left behind. But in future rounds, as we brought those stories forward, they were able to say, we need to modify this program. Let's remember the daycares. Let's remember the hair salons, and
mhm,
a lot of the things that are, we're working overtime in our community, like the daycares and those
yeah.
small businesses, making sure they got the money that they needed to
Mhm,
stay alive.
mhm,
So I think that our stories from our communities are very important, and it's important to have people who are willing to bring those stories
yeah.
up the chain.
And we often know how to do a whole lot with very little. Like we're all really scrappy,
Yeah.
and but connecting folks and having those trusted community partners who can meet them, um, because for so many of our small businesses they didn't have traditional banking relationships. They never really
Yeah.
needed it, and then you needed that to be able to access those PPP loans, and then
Yeah.
to get the forgiveness that like so many other businesses had a dedicated accountant,
Yeah.
who could fill out that paperwork. You had, and I had to help my parents work on theirs. Like it
Mhm.
was a really complicated process with a whole lot of math and complicated math depending on your, like, do you have part-time employees? Do you have full-time employees? Like so many of our folks are just doing whatever they can to employ as many people as they can in their community and lift them up and hold them whole.
That's
Um,
right. That's right.
and how we can continue to grow that and
Yeah.
invest in that. And
Mhm.
because our small businesses are micro businesses, right?
Yeah.
Like those
Yeah.
really truly what
I
I
know.
call a small business
Yeah.
They employ the vast majority of folks in
Yeah.
Massachusetts, and they're
Mhm.
often not represented in the conversations.
No. Exactly. And what I found most interesting about COVID, and there's pluses and minuses of this virtual world, but it allowed a lot of voices from communities like Leominster, Lawrence,
Mm,
Methuen, and Holyoke to actually be heard at the State House, because
yes,
they didn't have to spend a day driving in a car and sitting in a room waiting to be called. They could just continue with their work and then hop in online and
right.
be able to contribute to the conversation. And as that happened, you noticed that as the secretariats and the Baker
Mhm,
administration, and that they would call in experts, they were calling in experts from Leominster and
mhm,
Lawrence and
mhm,
Holyoke.
mhm,
Those Our community leaders became the statewide experts,
right.
because they were, I guess, finally being recognized for their innovation in being scrappy and being able to do more with less, and still producing really good results, despite the fact that they weren't having a lot of dollars dumped on them. They were
Yeah.
still managing to produce these amazing results.
Mhm,
And I think with them being able to come forward and show the value of, teamwork, working together with other organizations, and there's really a lot of value in that. And
mhm,
I do know that the, Baker administration and those secretariats did notice it. And
right.
they, came to me and said, "You've got some really smart people in your district." And I said, "Yes, we have some really smart people all across the
Mhm,
state. They
mhm,
just haven't had the opportunity to have their voices heard, because they're too busy working to take a
right.
day off to go into Boston and talk to you about what's going on." So I think that was really one of the things that made our community shine during COVID.
I'm incredibly proud of how many Leominster residents were able to testify in legislative hearings and executive hearings, and that the speaker so early on committed to keeping those virtual hybrid hearings, because for anyone outside of the greater Boston area, it is incredibly inaccessible to
Yeah.
participate in the legislative process. And so this kind of opened the door to something that we were told like is going to be too hard to implement, it's going to make it harder. I actually think a lot of the hearings went a whole lot more smoothly because of the way
Yeah.
that people signed up. You kind of got a feel for how many people were there. Do you have to hold tight to the 3 minute timeline? Can you give individuals from our communities a little more time to share their personal experiences? And so I'm looking forward to the next session with this, with us all having learned about how to do this in a
Mhm.
positive way and continuing it.
Yeah, it really has made government a lot more accessible to more people. And I think it showed a lot of people that it's not as scary as I thought it was going to be. They're so intimidated to say you are going to
Mm,
testify. It sounds like a very intimidating process,
mhm.
but you're really just getting up there and telling your story. And it's always very well received. I think our colleagues are always so thankful and impressed by people who take the time to come forward and share their stories.
Mhm.
And it definitely has an impact when you
Yeah,
hear it come right from a person's mouth. So
yeah. And so you and I have had the opportunity to help grow the sexual violence task force through the Women's Caucus. And a big part of that is how do we help these rape crisis centers who are doing incredible work all across the Commonwealth tell their stories and let us know as legislators what are the gaps in the law. And you and
yeah,
I have had experience as rape crisis counselors being able
yeah.
to do this. And we know that storytelling is the most powerful part of getting legislation done. Um, can you talk a little bit about what it's been like, kind of combining that previous work of you as a rape crisis counselor to being able to share our own knowledge base now as legislators with these
Mhm.
organizations and help them be better advocates?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, this is another thing that has been great about the virtual, that, we were able to go meet with every rape crisis center across the Commonwealth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really, might have been a very big undertaking for us, but it's nice that we've been able to bring all of those to personally interview and speak
Mm-hmm.
with each individual rape crisis center. But then also, I think, us being able to bring everybody together a couple times a year has also been helpful. It's
Mm-hmm.
nice. Previously, many of our members are too busy working. Again, they're too
Mm-hmm.
busy working, doing the work of the rape crisis centers, to be able to come together and take that time to share.
Mm-hmm.
And through the virtual world, they're able to do that. And, I really loved hearing the perspectives from so many different areas and all the ways in which their needs overlap.
Mhm.
I think the need for education and consent to education, we heard time and again,
Mhm.
which for me was one of the most shocking takeaways, I guess, from all those meetings. Typically you sit down with an organization and say, "What can I do for you to
Mhm.
help you?" Most of them say, "Please give me money," and
Mhm.
that's oh, I'm sitting with my legislator. Please get me more money. But they all were like, "We want to be put out of business. Like, can we
Mhm.
please try to find a way to prevent sexual assault and sexual violence in our community? We need to be doing more because we would rather be out of business than take the money. We don't want to have any more
Mhm.
cases. We
Mhm.
want to make the world violence free." And, I appreciated that no matter what corner of the state we went
Mhm.
to, it was pretty consistent that,
Yeah.
educating young people in an age appropriate way was really important. And, I think a lot of, I'm a parent, I have 3 kids, and I know like a lot of people get their hackles up saying, "Oh, well, I want to be able to teach my child,
Mhm.
on my own."
Mhm.
But the reality is that there are professionals out there who can do everything in an age appropriate way that can really keep our children safe. And so as a parent, I would like to know that other kids are getting the same education
Right.
as mine and keeping my children safe. So, it's a give and take, and it's hard, and it can be kind of a controversial place thing to talk about. But when you hear from professionals in the industry and seeing what they see in every single part of the state, when they come back and say, "This is what we need," that's really impactful to me. Um, and it's nice to be in the legislative position, to be able to take all that stuff that some of it we
Mhm.
might have known already from our own experience, but getting the confirmation of people in other places of like
Mhm.
what we may or may not have already known, and then
Right.
being able to bring those stories forward to the legislature and try to help either get legislation passed, get money to
Mhm.
sent to these to all of the different organizations,
Yeah.
and try to close loopholes, right?
Yeah. No, and it was more than 10 years ago that I got to be the teen counselor in Worcester County, going and having those conversations about healthy relationships and consent. And I say this all the time, it was by far the hardest job I had,
Right.
having those conversations with teenagers
Mhm.
about how do we not harm each other.
Yeah.
Uh, and we're still having that conversation. I got to see the very differing kinds of curriculum, and some that were really concerning and weren't equipping our kiddos with like the tools that they needed to be in healthy relationships.
Mm.
uh, and so that we're still continuing to push for this. We've had some wins thanks to some of the work where we've banned child marriage. This is
Mhm.
something that you and I have been talking
Yeah.
about for a long time, that Massachusetts should not be late to the game
Yeah.
in protecting our kids in this way. We're we're lucky that we were able to get a bipartisan push over the finish line, and we're celebrating it this week,
Mhm.
um, because there are a lot of folks that we've worked with who have been working on this for more than a decade.
Mhm. That's right.
And
And,
then go ahead.
I was gonna say, and continuing with all the work that you
Mhm.
did in the
Mhm.
bipartisan
Yeah,
push for the
yeah,
rape kit testing,
yeah,
which
yeah,
is really important to start closing unsolved cases. And
yeah. And I'm really grateful for you. You kind of tagged along with me to a tour of the crime lab that we thought was going to be kind of like just an informative session. Maybe we'd be able to take some pictures and understand what the legal challenges were that they were facing around testing this backlog of untested kits. And we were confronted with more resistance than we
Mhm.
really had anticipated, and knew, okay, there's going to be a little bit of a fight on our hands to make sure that these 6,300 survivor stories get their justice.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm grateful for you and your support in all of this, to make sure that we can remind the crime lab the trauma that these survivors have experienced, the courage that they had to have those sexual assault evidence kits collected,
Mhm.
and the duty that we have as a state to treat that evidence with all of the care and respect, and try to get them the justice if we can.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
And we're seeing some of those successes in Bristol County and
Mhm.
Boston, in the Boston Police Department. These are district attorneys and offices that have kind of gone beyond what the state is doing and said, we're going to be proactive. We're going to figure this out. And what's really cool happening in Bristol County is they got a $2 million Department of Justice grant, not only to test the kits, but to figure out qualitatively, why were some of these sexual assault evidence kits deprioritized?
Yeah.
Are there unconscious or conscious biases
Mhm.
leading some survivor stories to be prioritized over other survivor stories? And we're really hopeful that what Bristol County is doing is going to be able to help us all learn on how to rebuild this trust with survivors all across the state.
Yeah. I agree. I think that, the number, given the number that were sitting on the shelves, and, I think that it kind of circles back around to the education piece too, and helping people understand, um, the roots of sexual violence, where it comes from, what it means, what it looks like, and maybe kind of breaking down some of those biases too.
Mhm. Yeah. And so I do this every time we have these conversations to remind folks that rape crisis centers are available 24/7, completely free services, no matter how long ago your assault happened, or if you're a loved one and you're just not sure how to support someone you really care deeply about through their own trauma. Those services are available. They're available through a 24/7 hotline. They're available through counseling. They do not use insurance. They're completely confidential. And we've had the privilege of being able to be in those counselor roles and support survivors and their loved ones through incredible trauma. Um, but we've got to do more to connect folks with those resources, and help them reach them early, because for me, it was incredibly helpful to have those supports as early as humanly possible, um, to make sure that I could go on and continue all of the work that I was doing. So we have a few minutes left, and one of the questions I usually ask on this show, you don't know this, is kind of, do you have any tips for folks who are interested in getting a little more involved, how to be a better advocate, regardless of the issue that they care about? Um, we're not experts in everything, and I rely on my constituents to share all of their experiences and knowledge and expertise to help me better understand issues they care about. Do you have any tips for someone who's watching, who's seeing like a whole lot of stuff that maybe is frustrating them or
Mhm.
compelling them to get involved? How do they go about it?
Well, the people of Leominster are lucky to have you, because I know how you and your office operate. So I can say that they can call you.
Yeah, yeah.
And not to be intimidated by state reps. I think sometimes people think, we are up on a pedestal and we are untouchable in some way or
Mhm,
unaccessible, but
mhm,
that's not true.
mhm,
We are public servants. We're
mhm,
here to serve the public,
mhm,
and we are I know how you operate, like I do. It doesn't matter what age you are, what your voter status is, or who you are. If you live in my district, I'm
mhm,
here to serve you. And, we are here to take your phone call and or your email, and to hear from the people who live in our
mhm,
communities.
mhm,
And I think that a lot of people don't realize that picking up the phone and calling their state rep is pretty easy. They can call, they can have the conversation and help us hear about the things that are going on in the community, because like you said, we don't always know everything that's
mhm,
happening. We
mhm,
have to wear a lot of hats. We have to be a jack of
mhm,
all trades, master of none,
mhm,
or
mhm.
few.
Yeah.
And we don't always know what's happening. And I know
Mhm,
that it's one of the, I think the best part of being a
mhm,
state rep has been hearing from people and learning about things happening in the community that I had no idea were happening,
mhm,
and getting to dig into topics that I might never have known about otherwise.
mhm,
And so, I always welcome people to come to my office. I know you do too, to sit in the to propose legislation,
mhm,
or to talk about things that are frustrating, and maybe sit down and problem solve and try to find ways to come up with solutions. Sometimes we can solve problems in non-legislative ways also,
mhm,
by
mhm,
connecting with state offices, using our legislative liaisons that we have access to be able to help move things forward. And I always say, when in doubt, You can call a state rep, you can email
Mhm.
your state rep, and
Mhm.
if it's not a state issue, we can connect them with the federal government,
Mhm.
we can connect with the
Mhm.
local government and everybody in between. So, you know, I think that, you know, you, like I do, try to make ourselves incredibly accessible
Mhm.
and open door policy, and love hearing from constituents and hearing their stories so
Mhm.
we can take them to Beacon Hill. So
Mhm. Rep Minicucci, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me to share about the work and your incredible journey to the State House. And I'm looking forward to your next chapter and how we can continue to problem solve together. Uh, Leominsterites, thank you for tuning into the September episode. We will see you next month, and I hope you have a great rest of your September.